Laura Ramos had a bad start to her first day as a cleaner in the Antunes mansion when she noticed something alarming. Benicio, the 6-year-old son of millionaire Fernando Antunes, was desperately crying, holding his ear, but no one seemed to understand. While she was cleaning the living room, Laura saw the boy making strange gestures with his hands. These weren't childish whims. These were pleas for help in sign language. What she discovered, approaching with a magnifying glass, would change everything. Benicio wasn't just in pain, he was being silenced, and the responsible party was much closer than anyone could imagine. Laura Ramos adjusted her royal blue uniform for the 5th time before pressing the doorbell. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched her worn bag to her body. At 28 years old, she had already cleaned dozens of homes, but this mansion in the Jardim Europa district was different. Automatic gates, surveillance cameras, impeccable garden. Everything screamed money. Money she desperately needed to pay for her overdue apartment. The door opened, revealing a tall man in a light blue suit. Fernando Antunes was 42 years old, chestnut hair with gray strands at the temples, and a posture that radiated authority. He had been raising Benicio since his wife died 3 years ago. He nodded to Laura before gesturing inside. "Laura, right? The agency sent your resume. Start with the living room, and Isadora, the nanny, will show you where the cleaning supplies are." His voice was polite but detached, too professional, too cold. Before Laura could respond, his mobile phone rang. Fernando turned his back and answered, walking toward the office, already immersed in a conversation about stocks and investments. Laura entered the living room and froze for a second. The room was stunning. Wide windows framing the garden, a light beige sofa with pillows in blue and gray tones, decor that looked like it came straight from an architecture magazine. She barely had time to absorb the beauty of the place when she heard muffled crying. In the corner of the sofa sat a blond boy of 6 years old. Benicio was wearing a red Batman t-shirt, and he was crying, pressing his hand to his right ear. His face was red, tears streaming down his pink cheeks, and he was making strange movements with his free hand. Quick and desperate gestures that Laura couldn't decipher. "Hi, dear. Are you okay?" Laura instinctively approached closer, kneeling next to the boy. Benicio looked at her with wide-open eyes and continued, making even more frantic gestures. He pointed to his ear, then pointed to his mouth, then made circular motions with his hands. "He won't answer you," a sharp voice came from the doorway. Isadora, a woman about 35 years old, with hair pulled into a tight bun and a stern expression on her face, entered the room carrying a basket of toys. "Benicio is deaf and dramatic. Ignore him." Laura felt her stomach tighten. "But he's crying. It looks like he's in pain." "He's just seeking attention." Isadora set the basket on the floor with a dry thud. "He does this every day. If you give in, it'll be even worse. Let him calm down on his own." The coldness of this woman deeply disturbed her. She looked at Benicio again and realized the gestures weren't random. There was a pattern. There was intent. The boy was trying to communicate something urgent. Laura had a deaf cousin. When they were children, she learned a few basic signs in sign language before the family moved to another city. Her skills were rusty, but she recognized the movement that Benicio repeated over and over. A hand in the shape of a claw touching the chest and dropping down. Pain. And then he persistently pointed to his ear. "He's saying his ear hurts," Laura said quietly, almost to herself, but loud enough for Isadora to hear. "I said he's dramatic." Isadora crossed her arms. "Nothing happened to him. The doctor examined him last week. Everything's fine." Laura couldn't take her eyes off Benicio. The boy realized she understood something and grabbed her hand tightly with surprising strength for such a small child. His blue eyes begged, pleaded. There was desperation, real desperation. "At least I can check if he has a fever," Laura asked, trying to speak calmly. "You were hired to clean, not to play doctor." Isadora approached the sofa and roughly pulled Benicio by the arm. The boy let out a muffled groan. He doesn't need attention, he needs boundaries. The more you give in, the worse he gets. Now come on, Benicio, time to go to your room. Laura watched helplessly as Isadora dragged the boy out of the room. Benicio looked at her one last time, and in that gaze was something Laura would never forget. The silent plea of someone who was completely ignored. She remained on her knees on the floor of the luxurious living room with a racing heartbeat and a growing certainty that something was terribly wrong in this house, and that she was the only one willing to see it. Laura couldn't sleep that night. Lying on the thinning mattress of her one-room apartment on the eastern outskirts, she saw Benicio's desperate face over and over. The tears, the frantic gestures, the way Isadora dragged him as if he were an inconvenient object. At 3 a.m., she gave up and grabbed her mobile phone. Childhood deafness, signs of pain, she typed into Google. The results worried her even more. Ear infections in deaf children could be serious, especially if untreated. Often the signs were mistaken for difficult behavior. Laura continued searching until sunrise. Basic sign language for beginners was her next search. She spent 2 hours watching YouTube videos, practicing simple signs in front of the mirror. Good, pain, help. I understand. Her fingers moved awkwardly, but she was determined. When she arrived at the mansion on the second day, Fernando was already leaving. He waved absent-mindedly, talking on the phone about company mergers. Laura entered and headed straight to the living room with her red bucket and cleaning supplies. Her heart was pounding wildly. She knew Isadora wouldn't approve of what she was about to do. Benicio appeared 15 minutes later, still in his pajamas. He stopped in the doorway when he saw Laura, and his face lit up slightly, the first sign of something more than the desperation she had seen in him. Laura took a deep breath and with trembling hands made the sign she had practiced all night. She touched her chest with extended fingers and made a circular motion. Good. Benicio's eyes widened. He froze completely for 3 seconds, as if he couldn't believe his eyes. Then his whole face transformed. He ran to Laura and began gesturing frantically, so quickly that she couldn't keep up. Calm down, calm down. Laura made universal gestures, asking him to slow down. Benicio took a deep breath and started again. Slower. He made the sign for pain, which Laura recognized, pointed to his right ear, and then did something that froze her blood. He pointed towards Isadora's room and made a gesture that clearly meant something negative. Laura felt a chill down her spine. She pulled out the magnifying glass she always carried in her bucket, used for detailed cleaning on fragile items, and showed it to Benicio. With gestures, she asked if she could look at his ear. The boy hesitated, looked around to check if Isadora was nearby, and then quickly nodded. Laura kneeled down and with extreme caution brought the magnifying glass to Benicio's right ear. The boy winced at pain when she got too close, but remained still. Laura tilted her head, trying to see better in the natural light from the window, and her blood froze. Inside Benicio's ear was something. Something small and metallic that reflected the light. It wasn't earwax. It wasn't natural. It was a foreign object pressed into the ear canal. "Oh my God," Laura whispered, feeling nauseous. Before she could process what to do, she heard firm steps approaching. Fernando Antunes entered the room, adjusting his tie, apparently having forgotten something. He stopped abruptly, seeing the scene. Laura on her knees with the magnifying glass, Benicio with tears in his eyes. The unusual closeness between the cleaner and his son. "What's going on here?" His voice was controlled, but behind it there was a dangerous tension. Laura quickly stood up, her heart pounding wildly. There were 2 paths. Stay silent and keep the job she desperately needed, or risk everything for the boy she barely knew. She looked at Benicio, saw the renewed desperation in him, and made her decision. "Senor Antunes, I need to show you something. It's about Benicio. It's urgent." Her voice trembled, but she kept her gaze steady. "There's something in his ear, something that shouldn't be there. I think someone put it there on purpose." The silence that followed was deafening. Fernando looked at his son, Then at Laura, and for the first time since he knew her, she saw something more in his eyes than professional detachment. She saw fear. Hey, if you like this story, give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Every week, real stories come out here that will touch you. Your like really helps and motivates me to keep bringing you these stories. Thank you. Fernando crossed the room in 3 big strides. His expression completely changed. The mask of the cold businessman fell away, revealing a frightened father. He knelt next to Benicio and held his son's face with both hands, studying his eyes as if searching for answers there. Let me see. His voice came out hoarse. Benicio flinched but allowed his father to come closer. Fernando took his mobile phone and turned on the flashlight, carefully tilting the boy's head. Laura saw the exact moment he saw the object. His face completely paled. What is this? Fernando whispered more to himself than to anyone else. He stood up abruptly and shouted, Isadora, come here, right now. The nanny appeared seconds later, wiping her hands with a kitchen towel. Her expression was controlled irritation. Señor Antunes, I was preparing a snack for Benny. What's in my son's ear? Fernando interrupted her. His voice was low and dangerous. Laura had never heard anyone speak with such restrained fury. Isadora blinked in confusion. What do you mean? Don't make me repeat it, Fernando exploded, startling both women. There's a metallic object in Benicio's ear, and you're going to explain right now how it got there. The silence that followed was suffocating. Laura saw something change in Isadora's face. The mask of professionalism fell away, revealing first fear, then something worse. Defiance. It was for his own good. Isadora lifted her chin. Her voice came out cold and convinced. It's a modified sound amplifier. I put it there to help him, to hear, to make his ears react. He doesn't need to be deaf. He just needs stimulation. Laura felt her stomach tighten. Fernando froze completely, processing the words. You put a device in my son's ear without permission, without medical knowledge. His voice was so low it was barely audible. How long? 3 weeks, Isadora replied, as if reporting the weather. I read on internet forums about deaf children who improved with forced stimulation. I was trying to cure him, to make you proud of him. Proud? Fernando growled. I've always been proud of my son. Who do you think you are? Someone who really cares, Isadora retorted, losing her composure. You barely look at him, locking yourself in the office all the time while I handle everything. I was trying to fix what you ignore. Fernando took a step forward, but Laura instinctively stepped between them. He was trembling with rage. With visible effort, he stepped back and grabbed his mobile phone. You're fired. Leave my house right now. If you don't leave in 5 minutes, I'll call the police. Isadora let out a bitter laugh. The police. Why? For trying to help? You'll explain to them that you left your deaf son with a nanny because you don't have time? The phrase hit Fernando like a physical blow. He staggered slightly. Laura saw raw pain cross his face. Not just rage from Isadora's betrayal, but something worse. Guilt. Leave, he repeated, but his voice had lost its strength. Now, Isadora grabbed her bag from the kitchen and left without looking back, slamming the door loudly. The silence that remained was thick, heavy, full of unspoken truths. Fernando allowed himself to collapse onto the sofa, his hands covering his face. I knew. He said so quietly that Laura barely heard him. I knew something was wrong. I saw him crying, making those gestures, and I just trusted that Isadora was taking care, that I could keep working and everything would be fine. He looked at Benicio with moist eyes. What kind of father am I? Laura knelt next to Fernando, and her heart broke from the pain in his voice. A father who's here now. A father who will do what's needed. She held his hand tightly. But first, we need to get this out of his ear right now. Fernando nodded, quickly wiping his eyes. He took a sterilized tweezers from the first aid kit, took a deep breath, and with a delicacy Laura didn't think possible, carefully removed the small device from Benicio's ear. The boy let out a groan of relief. Tears flowed until, finally, for the first time in weeks, the pain stopped. And in that moment, seeing father and son embracing on the floor of the luxurious living room, Laura realized that she had witnessed not only a cruel revelation, but also the beginning of a transformation that could no longer be ignored. 2 days had passed since Isidora's expulsion. Fernando immediately took Benicio to an otolaryngologist after removing the device. The doctor confirmed a mild infection in the ear canal caused by the foreign object. He prescribed antibiotics and warned that if it had continued longer, the consequences could have been serious. Laura was cleaning the windows in the living room when she heard the doorbell. She opened the door and found Fernando standing there, with an expression that mixed shame and determination. He was holding a new notebook and a box of colored pens. "Can you teach me?" he asked bluntly. "Sign language. I need to learn to talk to my son." Laura felt a lump in her throat. "Of course I can." That's how a routine began that would completely transform this house. Every morning before Fernando went to the office, he and Laura sat at the kitchen table for an hour. She taught basic signs. "Good morning. I'm hungry. I love you. Sorry." Fernando practiced with devoted commitment, taking detailed notes, filming his own movements to correct mistakes. Benicio watched everything from the doorway. Initially, distrustfully. There was pain. Years of being ignored didn't disappear in days. But when he saw his father try to make the sign for "how are you," for the first time, even if the movements were awkward and tangled, something changed in his face. On the third morning, Benicio entered the kitchen and sat next to his father. He stopped mid-sign, looked at his son with eyes moist from tears, and tried to say, "Can I try again?" He completely messed up the hand configuration. Benicio let out a quiet chuckle, the first sound of joy Laura had ever heard from him, and gently corrected his father's movement. The house began to transform. Colored posters appeared in every room. On the refrigerator were milk and juice, with the corresponding sign drawn next to them. In the bathroom, brush teeth and take a bath. In the living room, watch movie and play. Fernando downloaded a Brazilian sign language app on his phone and watched educational videos during lunch at work. Laura discovered that Benicio had an extraordinary talent for drawing. The boy spent hours creating detailed illustrations of superheroes, fantasy landscapes, family portraits. It was his way of speaking when signs weren't enough. Fernando started framing the drawings and hanging them in the hallway, a gallery dedicated to his son's visual voice. "Look at this." Fernando showed Laura a drawing Benicio had made that day. It was a portrait of her holding the magnifying glass with the boy next to her smiling. In the upper corner, in neat letters, was written, "Angel. He drew you as an angel." Laura quickly wiped away tears. "I just did what anyone else would." "No," Fernando shook his head. "Seriously? Most would have ignored it, pretended not to see. You risked your job for a child you barely knew. That's not just anything. That's extraordinary." Weeks passed, and communication between father and son got better and better. Benicio started teaching Fernando new signs, slang and sign language, visual jokes, facial expressions that completely changed the meaning of words. They watched movies together, with subtitles. Fernando would pause to ask how to sign a certain word. Benicio taught with growing patience. But the peace was cruelly interrupted on Tuesday evening. Laura had just gotten home when she received a call from Fernando. His voice was desperate, broken. "Laura, it's Benicio. He has a very high fever, 40 degrees. The doctor said it's a secondary infection caused by the time that damn device was in his ear. We're going to the hospital. He'll need surgery." Fernando's voice broke. "They'll drain the infection, but they said there are risks. Laura, I can't lose him. Not now, when I'm finally learning to be the father he always deserved." Laura gripped the phone, feeling the world spin around her. She thought the worst had over, that Benicio was safe, but the consequences of Isidora's cruelty still haunted them like relentless ghosts. "I'm coming there," she said, already grabbing her bag and keys. "Fernando, he'll be okay. He has to be okay." But as she ran to catch the bus to the hospital, Laura couldn't shake off the fear gnawing at her heart like a hungry animal. The hospital corridors smelled of disinfectant and fear. Laura found Fernando sitting on a blue plastic chair, head between his hands, suit wrinkled. He hadn't slept. She could see it in the deep bags under his eyes, the stubble, the defeat in his hands. He went into the operating room 2 hours ago, Fernando said, without lifting his guys. They said the infection spread more than they thought. They need to fully drain the ear canal, clean the damaged tissue. It might take longer. Laura sat next to him and took his hand. He's strong. You've seen how he endured all this. I should have noticed earlier, Fernando finally looked at her, eyes red. 3 weeks, Laura, 3 weeks. He suffered while I worried about mergers and acquisitions. What kind of father lets this happen? A human father. Laura squeezed his hand tightly. A father who didn't know, but now you know, and that changes everything. Benicio sees it. He knows you're trying. That's what matters. They waited in silence. 4 hours turned into 5. Nurses hurried by.